Alrighty, good morning, and thank you for joining us for organic strawberry production. My name is Alexander Warshel. I am the Member Communications Coordinator at NOFA New York, and will be helping to make sure everything goes smoothly this morning. We also have Nellie from NOFA New York on as technical assistants. If you have any specific technical questions, feel free to send them directly to her in the chat. Just as a reminder, please remain muted with your video off during presentations. We have enabled closed captioning. These captions are auto-generated and not perfect, but if you'd like to see the captions, there should be a notification at the top of your screen enabling you to do so. This workshop is being recorded and will be shared on the conference website and mobile app shortly after this presentation. Feel free to introduce yourselves or ask questions using the chat function. And as questions come up, please type them in the chat and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Finally, NOFA New York's annual winter conference would not be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. NOFA New York would like to specifically thank our app sponsors, Hudson Valley Farm Hub and Honey Dog Farm. To learn more about these organizations and their work, please visit them in the marketplace or online. And now I'd like to pass it off to our presenters who can take it from here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Carlos Aguilera, and we will be presenting today how to grow strawberries in an organic setting. My wife and I and our 3 children, we run and operate West Haven Farm in central New York. Yeah, you want to introduce?
My name is Lorena, and we're gonna talk about how to grow strawberries in the Northeast. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Okay. So let's see, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So strawberries, as a lot of you probably know, are very exciting. It's one of the first fruits to be ready in the Northeast United States, and it's also one of the very first vegetables or fruits, if you may, in the Northeast. So it's very exciting when spring arrives and all of a sudden you have all these bounty of red berries. But that comes also with a set of challenges. And oops, let me see, somehow I can't. Oh, okay. And that comes with a set of challenges, and we'll be talking about what are the things that we have done in order for us to successfully grow strawberries, and hopefully there are other people who might be encouraged to grow strawberries. As you all know, farming is pretty challenging, and there are a lot of things to keep in consideration. And though these are the things we consider, and these are points that some of them will be points that we'll be talking about it, not necessarily we're going to stick to every single point. But there are 3 main tiers that when we decided growing strawberries in 2012 here in central New York, we keep in consideration. On the first tier, it was the marketing, because we couldn't plant strawberries if we didn't know where we were going to sell them. So, the first thing we started thinking about was, is there a market around us? And it turns out there is a big market around us. Strawberries are the second most consumed fruit in the United States. So there's definitely people who need them and want to buy them.
Carlos, sorry for interrupting, but we're having some technical difficulties where people are saying your screen still shows that the presentation is loading. They can't see the actual screen yet.
Oh, okay, I see. Let me see. Let me see if I can start. I'm gonna stop sharing for now and see. Oops.
Towards the-
So it sounds like we have a problem with that. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start sharing again. Okay, can everybody see my
Yes,
screen?
you
Okay,
can see that now.
okay, let me see. Just make this a big window.
Try through view.
Let me see. Okay. Okay, is that works?
That went back to the loading screen, but it might, not sure if it'll resolve itself. Yeah, it hasn't changed any there now. So if you go back to the presentation, I think under view, there should be a full screen.
Yeah.
Think.
Slideshow.
It'll work. That's given us the same issue. Interesting.
One of Chris' spouse.
Yeah, showing the screen. Resume share.
Yeah, it's still stuck on loading here.
Okay.
You connect to the
Let's see. I go on view. Oops.
I have full screen at the very bottom. That might be,
Full screen. Okay.
maybe that'll get us there.
Okay.
your
Let's see.
screen sharing.
Oops.
Oh, beautiful. With
Okay.
carrots. Oh my God.
Is it working?
Yes, we can see that now.
Okay.
This might be the best way to go forward if the
Oops.
Okay.
yeah, I think this is the best way to proceed. Thank you, Carlos.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure how I put it full screen though, but hopefully everybody can see it from here. Okay. Well. Okay, so I'll go back. So these are hopefully everybody can see it now. But these are the main points we consider when we decided growing strawberries since 2012 that we should keep in consideration. Is there a market? Who's going to buy it? How much could we produce? Are we going to deliver them? Are we going to do U-pick? What are we going to pick? And what if something doesn't work out? If we produce berries and we can't sell them or get rid of them, then obviously the production plan and what were the challenges? Yeah. Okay, looks like I have to manually do it now.
Yeah.
And one of the first things is like, why should you consider growing strawberries? As I said before, strawberries are the first fruit in the Northeast United States. It's grown commercially. It is a versatile fruit, so you can turn it into a smoothie, you can put it in a pie, you can put it in a salad, you can make, dressing for a salad, or you could just freeze them or eat them just fresh. So it's quite versatile. If you are like us, are in a commercial farm, it brings early revenue. Most of your fruits and vegetables will not start coming in until end of June, early July, and some of the tomatoes even later than that, into August. So strawberries being usually start coming in the second weekend in June, so it'll bring some early revenue. Believe it or not, they're relatively easy to grow and compared to other fruits such as peaches and apples and other berries. The only problem is I believe that they're on the lower on the ground, so it can be hard on people's bodies sometimes. It is a perennial plant, so you plant it 1 year, you put a lot of work into it the first year, and then subsequent years, 2, 3, and 4, and depending how long you keep them, the maintenance is less and less. And also by being a perennial plant, you can also, the soil can also establish and you don't have to cultivate as much. So keeping the soil in place is very important. And it helps also with the rotation with other crops. And some of the nutrient benefits of strawberries is it's not your superfood as people like to think about all kinds of vegetables nowadays, but it is rich in fiber, vitamin C, potassium, antioxidants, and we all know they are have anti-carcinogen properties. Okay, well, let's make a plan if you want to grow strawberries. You want to plan 2 or 3 years in advance. Definitely not, don't start like, don't be like, okay, I'm going to plant strawberries this year. In my experience, in our experience, it doesn't really work that way. You want to make sure that you have a good plan. Again, how you're going to sell them, and you want to make sure that your ground is not full of weeds and you have a good cover crop system in place. At the same time, at least 2 years in advance, you want to make a realistic plan that works for you. Sometimes we see other people having these really good operations, and maybe they just have things that we don't have. Maybe the irrigation system, the soil type, maybe they already have a market, but you should always try to make a plan that works for you, not how you see other people doing it. And on the planting year, most of the work happens that year. There is work on subsequent years, but most of the work happens on the planting year. And for marketing, Lorena is going to tell us a little bit about how we market and what are the things that we have found out that work and maybe don't work, and what happens if things are not working out.
Yeah, so when, like Carlos just said, when you start making your plan, if you think you want to go adventure and growing strawberries, these are some of the questions that you might answer first before you even start thinking about buying your strawberries plants or plugs. Make sure you have a market around you that is interested in strawberries. For example, do you have farmers market that you have access? If you do, there's a good place where you can sell your strawberries. Or do you have a grocery store that buy locally and they're willing to buy your strawberries? Either you grow them organic or non-organic. Do you live in a place where you could put a farm stand? There's a highway, you have a lot of traffic, or other source, or can you sell them online? Do you have a website where you can just sell them direct to the customer, and are you gonna deliver them or are they gonna pick them up? So it's all those things you need to make sure that you are access a good market for the strawberries. If you do, then how you're gonna advertise them, because you need to know how you're gonna let people know you have strawberries. If you go into the farmers market, I think it's easy because you bring them and display them. But if you're gonna have a U-Pick, you might want to start advertising in social media or on your website, a big sign in the road, or spreading the word around your community, if there's any community centers that you can display flyers. Yeah, and then once you know how you gonna sell them and how, if you have the market, do you plan in the you pick or pick your own? Depend, and that's gonna depend, like if you have the labor to pick them, or if you don't want to invest time picking them. So that's gonna depend and what model you would like to do. There's definitely pros and cons on both. When you pick them, you put all the labor, but you also taking care of your plants, and you're not you're being careful with them. You also can charge a little more for the strawberries, but the labor is intense for if you decide to pick them. And if you decide to put a you pick, then you're gonna put the maybe the same amount of labor, but not as intense, and customer service and signs, and being there for the time that you are open. So making sure the people take care of your plants, and you are able to do answer the questions for the customers. And it doesn't matter which model are you thinking, you're gonna have to do customer service for both. That is a must. So if you decide to do you pick, you're gonna have to be there in the patch and the time that you are open. If you're not, you're still gonna have to pick them and bring them to market and be there to sell them. Or if you have local restaurants or grocery stores, there is less customer service, but most of the time you need to deliver them. And there's also customer service. The other question that you need to know, is how much should I charge for them? What is the price around me? A good way to find out what is the price that you need to do is making, you need to know how much you spend and labor in plants growing them. But also you can, sometimes you can just go by that because you also need to be competitive in your market, and you need to know who are you selling. And if you're selling the farmers market, I will encourage you to go around and see the prices, even ask your friends or your neighbors, how much are you charging for your strawberries? If you do that, you also need to keep in mind and be able to recognize what is the quality of the strawberries. Is my strawberries look like good high quality, that I could even charge a couple dollars more for cord than my neighbors? Are they organic and the other ones are not? Or my strawberries this year just now look good high quality, and if I have a lot, I need to make sure I sell them. So even though probably doesn't, you really want more money, but you need to make sure you're charging the correct price. So those are the points that sometimes we see people bring like 20 pints of strawberries, and they don't mind charging $10 a pint because they know they only have 10 pints, and they look good or they don't, but they know they're gonna sell them. But if you are growing more, you kind of need to know how much you need to charge if you, by the end of the day, you don't want to have leftover strawberries. And also you might want to look into social media or people that is doing YouPick, how much are they charging? And again, if they're organic or not organic, and based on that, and if you end up having leftovers, what are you gonna do with your strawberries if you already pick them and you didn't sell them in market? How much, what am I gonna do with them? Or if I put them in YouPick and people is not coming to pick them, then what is the things that I need to think about? One of the things that we have done in the past is keep a couple restaurants that buy local in your email list, and shoot them an email or call them. Hey, do you want a couple of fresh strawberries? Do you and give them a discount if you think it's necessary, so you don't bring those strawberries back to the farm. Once you have the strawberries out of the cooler for a long period of time, especially if it's hot, you need to immediately think what you're gonna do with the strawberries. Once you put them back in the cooler, they're probably not gonna end up in the best quality. So keep up a couple restaurants, but also we have done freezing them. We have freeze them and give them to the CSA members if you have a CSA. But if you don't, you can also freeze them and try to sell them later. For that, you might need a certified kitchen, or you can just freeze them for you and your friends or your family. If you do that, if you freeze them, make sure you keep them in a freezer. There is plug and a good source of electricity, because you might find surprise later on. And don't ask me how I know this, but yeah. Yeah, I think that's all the points that I have. But definitely, if you decide to grow strawberries, there is definitely a market. You just need to be able to access the market. I'll pass the screen to Carlos.
Okay. All right, it looks like sound like we had a little bit of back noise there. If everybody could please mute yourself. I'm gonna try to do full screen one more time, because it will be helpful if you see somehow this thing is not working. Yes.
If this go in jail, then just touch it.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Well, never mind. I'll just stay the way it was.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So those are the points that we believe are important to answer while you do your marketing. And okay, well, if you answer all those things and you still want to do it, then well, it's time to prepare the land. As we said before, you want to make sure that you plan with ahead of time. And if you are going to plant them organically, or even if you're not planning to do it organically, we believe that having cover cropping 2 years in advance is definitely something you should do. Unless you are already growing vegetables, or you know that that land is being kept with, high organic matter, free of perennial and annual weeds as much as possible. Then you can get away a little bit with it, but if you're not sure, you definitely want to do this 2 years in advance. We do 2 cover croppings usually, one where we add cereal rye to add a lot of organic matter, and then we try to do a legume right before planting. And on this picture, we can see that on the top picture, we have a winter rye, and then on the bottom picture, we have red clover and crimson clover. There are a few options when we're talking about strawberries. There are June bearing, there are ever bearing, and I can't remember the other one right now. And for sake of these workshop today, we're going to talk about only June bearing. we plant two times. There is early, mid-season, and late. We plant early and mid-season because we have other things around the farm. We feel that it's not necessary to cover the entire season of strawberries. So we just plant an early and a mid-season, and that seems to work just fine for us. So we mow our cover crop 6 weeks at least before we plant the strawberries, because if we have a lot of organic matter, we want to make sure that we mow it, chop it down, and incorporate it immediately so that it starts breaking down. And then 2 or 3 weeks before we plant, we incorporate our chicken manure. We use pelletized chicken manure because we don't want to use loads and loads of compost, then needs really heavy equipment. If we're going to plant strawberries there for 3 years, we don't want to compact the soil, and we find out the chicken manure works just as well. And again, we were already depositing when we were doing our cover cropping, so we feel that not using tons of compost, especially because it's very expensive and to move around, it's just good enough. Then 2 or 3 weeks before we plant, we lay plastic, because we plant in plastic culture, which is something that is lately being used more in the Northeast. In the past, you used to plant just on bare ground, single row, and then you let the plant spread. But in plastic culture is more intensive, but you don't have to use as much fungicides, herbicides, but then you're dealing with the plastic, whether you do biodegradable or not. That it depends on what preference or what system you're going to choose. We don't use BioTello for the strawberries, biodegradable plastic, I mean, because it will break down before the strawberries are established, and we have to remove it under the organic certification. There are a couple different options when it comes down to planting strawberries. You can plant bare root strawberry plants, or you can buy plugs. We plant bare roots, the one on the right on the top picture, because it's significantly cheaper and they're more readily available. The plugs on the left establish faster. You can plant them later also, which means that you can accumulate more cover crops and maybe not spend as much labor in weeding and maintaining them, but they're significantly more expensive, like 3 times more expensive. And we'll talk about the cost later on. So as you can see, we're planting on the picture, we grow 1/3 of an acre of strawberries, and we prepare a ground, lay drip tape irrigation, and we plant our plugs. We try to put 2 inches of water. We want to soak the soil very well, because the bare roots were dormant all over for the winter. Then they have to go into the shock, where they are waking up at least 15 weeks before your first frost. So usually is at the end of June. You want to make sure you have plenty of water so you avoid mortality. Your plugs will be more ready to go. So you want to plant your plugs no less than 12 weeks before your first frost. Otherwise, they will not be able to establish properly. Okay, after that, we usually put 1.5 inches to 2 inches of of water on the drip irrigation, depending. And then we might do a fertigation at the end of August and early September. And after renovation, the following year after we have harvested them. Is all of the vegetables, as you know, since they're a small plant, they don't compete weeds very well. That is why we put them in plastic in the first place. We do a double row. And we cultivate, try to keep the aisles free of weeds as much as possible. Usually we go and cultivate or a hand weed every 10 to 14 days for the first 2 or 3 for the first year, the establishing year. And then we remove runners and flowers because we don't want any fruit from them. And unlike traditional system, where people will leave the runners, plant them farther apart, as I was saying earlier. We don't want any of those runners. What we really want is the plant to keep all of its energy that got stored. We don't want the plant to produce any daughter plants, as they call them. We just want the plant to produce crowns, because the crowns are the ones that are going to produce us fruit the following year.
So we go how many times?
We usually do 2 or 3 passes, removing runners, and flowers only once usually, maybe twice, because not all of them come out at the same time, but we remove runners and flowers 3 times for the year when we establish them. After we have cultivated, irrigated them, this is what they look like. And you can look on the lower left picture, they look like they're dying, but in reality, they're just going into dormancy. They have grown for those 15 weeks. And now it's time for us to protect them. Even though strawberries are resilient, they can survive the winters here. You will get a lot of mortality. So you want to put 2 or 3 inches of straw mulch. And we strongly encourage having oat straw instead of other kind of straw, because we have found out that hay, leaves, and like rye and wheat have a lot of seed, and they resow themselves, and they do survive. So we cover them 2 or 3 inches, and late November, early December, depends on the temperature. Usually we just keep an eye out for the temperature, and lately it's been more on the December side than on the November side. And as you remember on the first picture, there was no weeds, and now there's a lot of green matter there between the rows, and that's because we're trying cover cropping in between the aisles, and that's daikon radish, and we're trying to compete the weeds, and that's the daikon radish that just died. The bottom right picture is how the strawberry look right now. You know, they're nice and dormant. The other part the strawberry, the mulch does is with climate change is that it regulates the temperature. As you have noticed, and we've been getting really warm temperatures, and then all of a sudden really cold temperatures, and the straw regulates the temperature. So if your strawberries wake up too early, they'll start producing new growth, and then when they break dormancy, they will not be able to handle the cold as well if the temperature drops again. Well, so again, the first year you work, you do all of this work and you don't get anything. But then the following year, it's harvest time. And then if everything worked out just fine, and you made a really good plan, then you should have tons of strawberries. And you can see the child in the middle picture looks so happy to have that strawberry. And strawberry harvest happens usually the second week in June for us here in central New York. And we try to harvest as early as possible in the morning. We harvest 2 days per week for our market, and also because it works out with the rotation per week. So every plant basically gets harvested for 3 weeks, 2 days, so 6 times total. We harvest really early in the morning because strawberries cannot handle heat very well. They'll get bruised and mushy, and they won't keep well. And also they can't handle a lot of rain because they also get bruised really easy, and then they don't keep. You want to bring them into a cool area as soon as you're done harvesting them. Usually we finish by 11 in the morning, and we keep the temperature between 37 and 40 degrees in our walk-in cooler at about 90% relative humidity. So after we harvest them, it's time to renovate them. And because we grow in plastic culture, then the following year we remove the plastic mulch, and then we renovate them. And this is because it's part of the certification that you have to remove the strawberries, the plastic. You can't just leave it there because it starts breaking down. And usually we do these, try to do it no later than 10 days after we're done harvesting. So that's in early July. And we put a lot of water. They go into dormancy with the heat right after we're done harvesting. So we cut all the tops. We leave about 2 inches. And I was looking for a picture. I couldn't find one, but I will keep searching. And then we use fertigation at that point because it's a perennial plant, unlike your compost. You want to make sure that the nutrients get down. If you put compost, the nutrients are just going to wash off the bed. This is the reason strawberries and tomatoes, people use fertigation, because you want to make sure that the nutrients get down to the bottom. That way, it's very important to put a good amount of fertilizer early in the season before you plant the year before, and then you cover cropping, because your cover cropping will give you that slowly release of nutrients for the next 2 or 3 years, because you only plant them every 2 or 3 years. We use an organic approved nitrogen, because they will need enough nitrogen. And we use potassium sulfate for phosphorus. In our soil, we don't have a phosphorus deficiency, but we have a potassium deficiency. So we use water soluble potassium for the renovation. And another big challenge is diseases. Here you can see, and again, you put all this work into them, then all of a sudden you start seeing fungus. And while we all like the idea of not having to ever have to deal with funguses and not spray anything, the truth is the weather in the Northeast is just too erratic. There's too many, it's too dry all of a sudden, so you end up with spider mites. Then it's too wet, so you end up with funguses. And every time you have a leaf wetness over 8 hours, you're going to deal with some kind of fungus. And these are some of the most common diseases that we have seen. We try not to spray when it's not necessary, but we sprayed 2 or 3 times the strawberries per season. We use sometimes a copper-based fungicide to prevent ideally you want to do this before there's a wet event in the spring, usually right before blooming, with a copper base so that the fungus don't harbor any plant thing, because as you know, springs in the Northeast are usually wet and rainy, cold. And then we do an oxidate, which is hydrogen peroxide. It basically is harmless. It doesn't stay on the plant. It just kills the fungus on contact, and then it's done. And sometimes you can use a sulfur based product if you have mites, but sulfur is not very effective for almost anything else, a little bit for gray mold. But what we have noticed that works better is more biological fungicides like Bacillus subtilis or Reinutria sacchariensis. That's a hard one. And also called Serenade, I think that's the brand names, and Regalia. Those seem to work better, but because they activate the immune system of the plant, you have to plant it. You have to spray it at least 4 hours before there is a wet event. And obviously, the first thing you want to consider before you do any of these fungicides is you want to make sure that you have a fertile soil beforehand, because the plant's immune system will be stronger and will be more healthy instead of you using remedy like a fungicide. You want to have good plant spacing, because if there's good airflow, the leaves will dry out easier. And if you can, don't put any overhead, because the plants don't really need the water on the foliage. They just need it on the roots. So if you can put the drip, that's why we put the drip irrigation, and it's plastic, but it's much better. It saves water. And then whenever we have to put water, we don't have to run the overhead irrigation. And we try to do a good job at keeping the weeds off the plant, because, you know, again, want to make sure that we have a good air movement. And don't over fertilize. Over fertilizing just to make sure that you have big sturdy plants, it can be detrimental, not to say that it's expensive. There are 2 major problems when it comes down to any kind of farming, pretty much. One, it's climate change. You know, it's just the weather patterns are just too erratic. It's going to be like 40 degrees next week, I believe, and tomorrow it's going to be like below 0 here. So it's just all over the place. It's either too dry too wet, too cold, too hot for too long. So all of those things harbor diseases and harbor more cost, more weeds, higher cost of water, not enough snow, so that encourages erosion and all these things. And that's, like a domino effect. There's more disease, more pests, and obviously as all these things get more expensive, then the cost just gets passed on to everyone, and then just the cost of growing a product is more expensive. Another challenge lately, well, it's always been that way, but it seems to being more on everyone's attention, is the cost of labor in New York compared to neighboring states. As you are already known in farming, there's been a few policies that have changed in New York State. And there is a new talk, and the governor and the state of the state talk about raising the new minimum wage to make it based on consumer price index, basically based on inflation. If inflation goes up, minimum wage is going to go up, and that just makes it more challenging. It's good for the employees, and I think everybody needs it. It's just the question is, where is that money going to come from? Because we're talking about all these other challenges like climate change and growing in the smaller scale because it's better for the planet. On the other hand, it's not profitable. And the big question is, who's going to do it? I have worked in agriculture for a long time, and there seems to be always a problem. Everybody would like to have all these fruits and vegetables, fresh, organic, grown in small farms, but there just don't seem to be enough people who want to do it as a career. So that's a big question, who's gonna do it? Okay, well, and how expensive is it? Well, the first year, this is an analysis of how much we believe you are going to spend before you get anything, just to establish based on 1 acre. We plant 1/3 of an acre because that's how much we know we can manage and as much as we need for right now. But this cost analysis is based on 1 acre. So the first year you should know that you should be spending anything between $17,000 and $18,000 per acre, and that's not it yet. On year number 2, you are going to harvest them. You're not going to buy a lot of the same things. Like, I want to go back because I want to talk about a little bit about the single most expensive item for stallaging is the labor. It's half of it. It's labor. And yes, all of the fungicide, plastic, and all the other things, cultivation, they do add up. But the single most expensive thing is labor. So it's very important when you think about it, who's gonna do it? How are you gonna pay for it? Then on the following year, you're going to not have to plant it again, but you're gonna have to maintain it, harvest it, et cetera, et cetera. Then you're gonna cover it again. And then on the second year, you have revenue. On the first year, you don't have any revenue. On the second year, you have revenue, but you were $17,000 to the acre on the whole before you touch a dime. Plus you have to harvest them and everything else. So that's another $14,000. And then you start having grand total for $21,000 for all the supplies, because you're gonna have now quartz, boxes, et cetera, depending on your model. And the final answer is, can you make money on year 3? Because if it isn't a business, then you're doing it it's either a hobby or you're doing it just for yourself, right? If you, like us, who need to pay your bills based on a profit, you want to make sure that you make a profit. At least that's our case. Some people might feel different. But on year 1, you again are $17,000 on the whole, where you just put all this money, all this time, and you get nothing in return. On year 2, we believe that you can get an average in New York State for certified organic strawberries about $8. Your average yield is going to be 5,000 quarts to the acre, so you're averaging about $40,000 to the acre. When you combine the loss for the year before and the expenses for the current year, you are making just a little bit, just a little under $1,000. But then that's why you want to keep them for longer, because then you don't have to come up with all these upfront costs. But on year 3 is when you actually start recuperating your money, because you don't have all of those expenses that you did on year 1. And then on year 3, then you start seeing the results. So in our case, we keep strawberries for we harvest them for 2 years. After that, they use the disease pressure and other factors. And also for rotation purposes, we need to start moving them. So we terminate them after 2 years of production, meaning they're in the same place for 3 years. So and per acre, again, we don't do an acre, we do 1/3 of an acre, but per acre, we get a cumulative revenue of $80,000 an acre, $60,000 in expenses cumulative per acre. So we net $19,000 total. If we divide that, we have to divide those $19,000 because you operated those the 1 acre for 3 years. You only had revenue for 2, but you operated for 3. And in the end, we averaged about $6,341 to the acre. And so it's not super profitable. It seems like you're bringing a lot of cash, but it's because you had a lot of expenses from the beginning. Okay, so we're done. And we're happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos and Lorena. That was very informative. I will start in with the questions. I just got to scroll back in the chat. First question comes from Roxanne. They ask, where do you purchase your organic plugs from?
Yes, so we don't buy plugs, as I said before, because they're substantially more expensive. And we buy bare root plants. We buy them from a nursery in Massachusetts. It's called Norse Farm, and they have the best quality bare root plants that I can think of. They're starting to do a little bit of plugs, but they're very expensive. So for us commercially, it's not worth it. And there's another one in Canada, but there's not a lot of them done in the Northeast. So I personally would not recommend it if you're gonna do a good size amount of acreage, because it can get pretty expensive.
The varieties are also very limited.
Yes, the varieties are very limited. You can get only very few varieties, yeah. And with bare root, you can get almost any variety you want.
Thank you. And then you mentioned Canada. What was the name of the Canadian?
I forgot their name. It's a hard name, but it's outside Montreal. The farmers that we had the farm before bought them a couple of times, but it's a whole thing to bring them from Canada. They sell them cheaper there, but you have to get a permit because you're importing them, et cetera, et cetera. And you also have to drive because they're live. And if they ship them to you, you still get to apply for the permit. And shipping can be pretty expensive. I forget their name right now, but I can find out and I can share it with you if anybody's interested.
Yes, that would be great. Next question comes from Richard. They ask, looks like you are leaving the plastic in place over the winter. What type of plastic is approved for this by the NOP? I think he's asking about like brand name or type.
Yes. So we did ask the certifier if we could leave it over the winter for the reason, and they say as long as it doesn't start breaking down, so it's your regular plastic that you buy from your supplier, and that way we have to remove it right after we harvest because it will start breaking down after that. So it's your regular plastic mulch. I think it's the 6 mil, the one we use, or it might be it's the thicker one we can find.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question comes from Chloe. Could you use landscape fabric instead of plastic and keep it in place year to year?
Yes. When we took over the farm, the previous farmer had landscape fabric on the pads, And that was the same. The certifier said you just have to make sure that as soon as you notice any breaking, that you have to remove it. So the previous farmer had done that 3 foot wide, and then just fasten it with staples. For us, it just was a little too much labor involved, so we decided not to go with a landscape fabric.
It was definitely too much labor to put the landscape fabric, and we just didn't like it as much. It's just not very appealing to put that much landscape fabric.
Yeah.
But if you wanna do it like for gardening, or you want to do a small patch, it might be worth it.
Yeah, you can probably, I would recommend taking it down, because after it lays down for over a year, then definitely starts breaking down. So the maximum we can keep is for a year. We plant in June, harvested the following June, and we remove it right away.
Awesome, thank you. Joy asks, is there a difference in yields or days to maturity relative to the type of plug you use?
There is, one has to do with the variety of plant. What variety do you choose? And also, if you plant them really late, you're not going to get crown development. If you're not trying to grow foliage, you're trying to grow crowns. So we try to have 3 to 4 crowns per plant before we get to the first frost in October. For us, it's October 10th, the first predicted frost. So it's very important to plant your strawberries no later than 15 weeks before that, or if you're doing plugs, 12 weeks. And then that should give you, it doesn't matter where you are, because in the end of the day, it's about growing degree days. So if you plant them at least 12 weeks for plugs and in 15 weeks for bare root, you should be good with 3 or 4. If you wait after that, then the plugs, then you're not going to get as much crown development, and the crowns are the ones that will produce the flower buds for the following year.
Thank you. Next question comes from Carrie. They ask, what do you fertigate with?
Yes, so we use there's a product it's based of soy. It's called Ferticell, and it's got 16% nitrogen. And we use, let me see, a potassium base, water soluble. Where is it? We use potassium sulfate of potash because, like, as I said before, and they're both water soluble. You can use fish emulsion if you wanted to. We don't use it because it is really sticky and it clogs the it will clog your drip type irrigation. And if you're planning on keeping the drip irrigation for 2 or 3 years, you're gonna have problems where some areas are gonna be clogged and you're not gonna get the water or the fertilizer. So that's why we use that those 2 particular products for fertigation. It's called Ferticell. It's a soy base and the potassium sulfate.
Thank you. Next question comes from Richard. They ask, does your labor expense include a payment for your own labor? And if so, at what rate?
No, we don't pay ourselves. We make less than our employees per hour, for sure. Again, but we do make a profit. As you saw on the bottom, there's a profit per acre. We don't make that much because we only grow 1/3 of an acre, but no, we don't pay ourselves. We just get whatever is left in the end.
Thank you. Next question comes from Liz. They ask, do you have any experience using row cover versus straw for winter cover? Wondering how they compare.
Yes, we have tried that too. You would have to, it's very expensive, much more expensive than the straw. The straw, I think it comes down to $900 per year for 1 acre. 1 row cover, that you want the thickest one, and you might want to do a second layer, and it will be more than twice as that amount. That is the other problem with the row cover is that it doesn't do as good of a job regulating the temperature and insulation, and also can get hot when on sunny days very quickly. So I would be very careful with the row cover.
Yeah, also we didn't like using it because with the straw, when you remove the straw in the spring, you leave this, you only open the crowns. So you put the straw under the strawberries. So we find out that in a hot year, if you have your strawberries in the plastic, we got a lot of sunburn in the strawberries. So the straw, it keeps the strawberries from the wet and from the getting sunburn. That was a big issue that we find.
Yeah, it's straw is definitely the way to go by far. The other bonus of the straw is that you add the straw, you remove it when you terminate those strawberries. All of that straw from 2 years, when you reincorporate all that straw, it turns into beautiful soil because you have added so much organic matter to it.
And also looks beautiful,
Yes.
like just the paths of strawberries and the straw. It just we are very
Yeah, we're that
Particular.
kind.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question comes from Joy. They ask, where is a good place to get straw from that is organically grown? Are there companies you recommend, or things right my way right there? Would have product available in other states?
We don't buy it from a company in particular. There's a farmer, a local farmer that it just grows a lot of oat straw, and we just buy it from him. We have bought it from different places. It's hard to get reliable oat straw around here, so it depends. I would just talk to, if you live in an area where there are farmers close by, I would just contact them and say, I'm looking for straw. The straw, because it's an input, doesn't have to be certified organic as long as it has not been treated. If you find it organic, it's slightly more expensive, but not by much. We're just happy with this particular farmer. He always has nice bells, and it is a little bit of a drive. It's like 45-minute drive, but it's reliable. We could get cheaper organic, like wheat and rice straw, but again, it has seeds, they will survive, and then we have to be weeding all that stuff throughout the season. And I made a mistake for the garlic one year, and it ended up costing us a lot of time and money, going through and weeding that the following year.
Yeah, I would recommend you to go to maybe like a farm to farm website if you have one, and just ask, or Craigslist. It's a good place to find if you have a group of that you're following in your region. You might want to go through that source.
Yeah, just talk to other people who are farming, where you get your stuff from.
Thank you. Next question. Julie asks, do you put any cover on top of the strawberries in the cooler?
Yes, because we have actually noticed if you drop the temperature below 37, the strawberries will start getting cold injury. Also, if it is too humid, they'll start getting mold. So you want to keep it, that's very important post-harvest. You also don't want to have to take them out, in and out of the cooler, as Lorena was saying during marketing. You want to get them out, sell them, and not bring them back, ideally, because you want those strawberries to be gone and people eating them. Otherwise, the quality will decline very quickly. What we do is that we put, if the moisture is not right, we will put a little bit of a bucket of water in the cooler, and then cover them with plastic, like a plastic bag on top of it, or a piece of cardboard, to stop them from evaporating. You also want to make sure that there are cracks in between the flats. We call them flats, the boxes, so that they get cooled down quickly. That's why we say it's very important that you are done early in the morning harvesting them. Usually we're done by 11 harvesting strawberries. After 11 o'clock in June, late June, early July, it gets too hot. So the strawberries will get hot and get very soft very quickly. So humidity, temperature, and then cover them as best as you can. But make sure that they're not soaking wet. Like there's not over humidity, because then you start running into mold problems as well.
If they're dry when you harvest them, if they're nice and dry, then you can cover them.
Awesome. Next question is from Joy. What about biodegradable plastic or paper mulch? Have you tried those?
We have not tried paper mulch. We have tried biodegradable. The problem with the biodegradable for strawberries would be that under your organic certification, you still have to remove it anyway, and will break down before you harvest them the following year. So you probably, with your biodegradable, you're gonna have to remove it at the end of the fall. Otherwise, it will start breaking down, and you're probably gonna run into some issues with your certification. But the paper mulch, we haven't tried it. It's usually too rigid, so it's not flexible. So you have to drive really, really straight if you're planting on commercial. If you're laying just a small patch for you and your family, you probably are just totally fine with using paper mulch.
Awesome. Next question. I have a couple different messages asking if there's a way to get your slides. So after this, after we end the recording and everyone leaves, we can talk, Carlos and Lorraine, about how to get your slides to me. Because there's a lot of interest in that. People are loving this presentation. Next question is, it's a comment. Do you have any advice on pest pressure? We have lots of trouble with voles over winter and chipmunks at harvest.
Get cats. I would say get cats. If you farm allows for a place, we have 2 cats around the farm, and it's they do more than anything else deter them. More than anything, more than eating them. But we have noticed that they do definitely work for rodents. Not just for strawberries, but for other things. We have them in our greenhouse. But then, when they get sick, you have to spend some money on them. Don't tell us how we know that.
But yeah, there's also some birds damage.
There's bird damage, yeah.
I mean, it seems like it's not something that is super bad for us. I think we can, yeah.
Yeah, the birds do damage a little bit. It's not a ton for us, but you can always have like a cannon. If you're not in like a highly populated area where you're gonna match the neighbors, you can get a cannon and you attach a propane tank, and then it will just explode like every 10 minutes. But you can also get like a scarecrow, and there are other things like there's an alarm for birds that might also scare the chipmunks. Bird something is the brand, I can't remember right now.
Doesn't matter what you do, you're always gonna have some damage.
You should account for some kind of damage. So when we were talking about our numbers, those are marketable. Those are what you harvest and you sold. We probably get a little higher yield, but then we lose some through disease, through birds, through whatever else. Oops.
Awesome. Next question comes from Nicole. Regarding the soil prep, my understanding is that many types of berries like a more acidic soil. What is the ideal pH for strawberries?
Yeah, for strawberries it's 6.7. It's relatively neutral. Yeah, so unlike your blueberries, they like it more acidic. But strawberries, you can do it just fine with if you're growing other vegetables, you don't have to adjust it. I wouldn't at least worry too much about it.
Thank you. Next question is, how often do you fertigate and what quantity of nitrogen per acre do you apply?
Yes, we do in different stages. We do for the establishing year, we fertigate. Again, because we use our cover crop and we use our chicken manure before planting, we don't have to worry about it until the fall, before the plants go dormant. I think we do it only once. And then in the spring, after we don't do any fertigation in the spring until after we have removed the plastic and we're ready to renovate. The idea is to put 100 pounds of nitrogen to the acre and for the season. So you can do that as soon as you're done. You mow them with the weed whacker, with your mower, whatever you have. Remove the plastic, soak the soil, and then put about half of your nitrogen then after renovation. So 50 pounds to the acre. And then you do 2 more fertigations 3 or 4 weeks later, and then right before they go dormant in late September, you do the last one. So 3 fertigations for the season. After you have harvested them the first year, and you do that again the following year, and only 1 fertigation in the fall, the year we establish them.
So they need 100 pounds per.
Yeah, for nitrogen, and potassium is 120 pounds.
Thank you. Next question is, I apologize if this has already been covered, but what variety do you feel is best suited for your production?
For the Northeast, Yules is the best variety. It's a mid-season variety. It does pretty well. It tastes pretty good, and it holds well. It tastes good. We plant another variety called Wendy, which is an early variety. It's early glow variety, but it's a cross between early glow
Yeah,
and
it's
another
people favors, but it has some challenge. And these are our varieties that we plant. There's a lot of varieties in the market that you can find to try. Sometimes here and there we try a couple, but we have come out with those 2.
Yeah, Wendy and Yules are the ones that we prefer.
Wendy for early, Jules for late.
Yeah,
or-
for mid-late season. The biggest challenge with the Yules is that it's susceptible to gray mold, and Wendy is susceptible to leaf spot. So those are the 2 things that you have to keep in mind with those varieties. But overall, they work fine. We have grown in the past honey eyes, and they are really resistant, very productive, but they are a little more acidic. So if your customer base prefers a more acidic variety, I think that's the way to go.
If you're planning to sell those berries for cooking jam or desserts, definitely the honey.
Yeah, honey eye is better one.
It's the best for jam, for any type of dessert, because it's a lot acidic, but still have the strawberry taste.
It also has a really nice color.
Carlos had hard time stopping growing that one because it's like a real berry. Because it's, when it's a hot year, it's one of the best berries.
Yeah.
But if it's a little rainy and cold, people try to make a funny face when they try them because they're a little acidic.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's something to keep in mind, that every season is slightly different, and on the year where it's hot, your more acidic berries will be the best ones. But on a cold, wet year, your less acidic berries will be the best ones.
Thank you. As I keep going through the chat, someone mentions, I believe the Canadian wholesaler is, and I'm going to butcher this name, is La Reault, Lareault.
Yeah, something like, yes, that's them.
Okay, awesome. And then another suggestion is Cottle Strawberry Nursery Incorporated for plugs. They're down in North Carolina, just to read that to everyone.
Yeah, and mostly Norse is doing some plugs, but they only have 3 varieties, I believe. And they just started doing it as of last year, and there's a minimum order for 5,000, I believe. So they're not as available. But in North Carolina, they do more plastic culture, so they're doing it more. In Canada, they're doing more, and now Norse is doing it in the Northeast. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question is from Carrie. I apologize if this is above. How many years do you keep strawberries in the same bed?
We keep them for 3 years because of a rotation, as I said before, but you can keep them for longer if you take care of them properly. In my experience, the problem is disease and rotation for the farm.
We do it that way because our weed control and diseases, but if you do it as small, I think you can keep the longer.
Yeah.
You just have to renovate them every year.
Right.
5, 10 years, some people.
Traditionally, you can keep them 5 years. That's how they used to do it. So there is no need. It just not necessarily with this method. Once you remove the plastic, the runners are going to be harder to manage. And once you don't, because you've been cutting the runners, unless you go on the traditional mother row. If you go on the traditional mother row, you can keep them for longer. But the disease pressure will still be the same.
Also, the quality declines after 3 years.
Yeah, they get smaller on year 2 and 3 for sure.
Thank you. Another suggestion in the comments to read aloud for everyone, Cube Pack in New Jersey for plugs, and some words of praise. They said they did a strawberry tasting at Ithaca Farmers Market, and out of 8 organic berry growers, Lorena and Carlos's were the best looking and best tasting berries. So
okay, good to know.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
yes,
Thanks for letting them know.
everyone's saying great presentation. Thank you. Oh, I think I missed one in the chat. Someone says, if we didn't cut back the runners in the late summer, fall, can we cut them back in the early spring?
You have lost the energy of the plant because the plant wants to reproduce and is going to focus on producing runners and not producing crowns. So you will produce a lot of plants. Then you start getting into a crowding situation where then you have more disease problems. One advantage of that is that you have some freebies, so you can replant those. But then you're going to sacrifice the free production.
But also, they're gonna be very established already. The main crown is gonna be disturbed with all those plants that are
Too much competition.
I mean, if you're not doing it commercially, if you want to experiment with some, you might find out very fun to see how many plants you can have in a crown or stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. And apologies to Carla that I originally skipped that. I missed that in the chat earlier. Next question. Oh, a comment on the pest pressure. Someone says children also scare away the different pest pressure. So there's and then a lot of thank yous and awesome presentations. And I think there's another question right here from Ricky. How do you and your crew get through peak harvest season?
Yeah, what?
How do you and your crew get through peak harvest season? I think talking about the labor and the amount of fruit and things like that.
Seltzer, coffee, joking around,
And pastries.
just pastries. Keep saying, there's gonna be an end to this. A lot of hope. Yeah, a lot of good vibes. Try to do it together. Everyone gets out there and we get those strawberries together.
Thanks, Ricky, for your question.
Next question is from Joy. The plastic has to be removed after year 1 and then you replace in year 2 with plugs in the ground. How do you get the holes in the plastic like that?
Yeah, so we have a transplanter. So we go with a transplanter and mark them so that every hole is exactly the same spacing. But you can also just rip off the holes with the tools because we plant by hand. The plugs could be planted with the transplanter, but the bare roots cannot. So we have special tools that had like a half a moon shape cut on the tip, and then we put it in the hole and we press it down, and then it stays in the ground.
There's a picture of one.
Yeah, and when in the presentation there was a picture where the tool was. And then, but if you do plugs, then you can do it with your regular transplanter poking holes.
Yeah, if you are aligned with the weather and you're like very in time, what happened this year, we, for some lucky reason, we poked the holes when we knew it was gonna rain.
Yeah.
So we went with the tractor with the transplanter. So we got the holes full of water. That was just our lucky.
It was a
hit.
lucky, yeah, that night, yeah, we went the evening before, marked the holes. That night rained, so it was nice and wet the hole, so we could just squeeze in the plants easily.
Thank you. And many thanks in the presentation or in the chat about the presentation. There's a million people who loved this, and a million comments of thanks and gratitude. Last call for questions in the chat here. Give it 2 seconds to anyone to type in any questions. So we're just about at 11:15 and time to wrap up. Alrighty, not seeing any other questions in the chat. So I'd like to drop a link to a survey if everyone could fill that out. We use these survey responses to see what people liked, what people thought could be better. And judging by the participation in this workshop, it was very well enjoyed. And just even those comments go miles to help inform our future education programs and things like that for NOFA. So please take some time to fill that out and tell us what you thought. And thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity as well. And thank you everyone for all the questions.
Thank you, Carlos and Lorena.
Okay.